Thanks for being with me tonight. I wanted to show you my easel, which I think is probably one of the most important parts of the work that artists do, those who do canvas paintings. Um, I want you to see, for example, that this is on wheels. Doesn't have to be, but um, mine is. I like it that way. It gives me a chance to kind of move it around. Now, the other easel I've got has no wheels. If I move it, I have to pick it up, move it around, do what I want to, but it would work and do fine. This is adjustable. It can go up and down, which is fine. And what you need, there's an adjustable sort of catch at the top. I think one of the things that I want to explain about the easel that's most important is the idea that it's really just a wood frame. And what you're able to do with it is modify it in ways that work best for you. For example, I added this extra bar across the top. Gives me a chance to hang a square on a T-square on it if I want to. I also have my artist maul, which is just, in this case, is just basically a stick that allows me to steady my hand, and I lean it against the top of that so that my stick is fairly long. It's about 6 feet, and the idea is that I can rest my hand on it, and it takes a little bit of stress off the rest of my body. So when I want to make big brush strokes, I can make the big brush strokes. But when I need to do the details, it steadies my hand so that I can do the details. It also allows me to draw straight lines if I want to, or paint straight lines. It's very useful that way. There was a time, I think, there may still be people who do this, where they'll wrap a cotton or make a soft sort of knob on the end of the stick to just get you to see this. There would be back up here that they could actually put on the painting, but I don't need to do that basically because I've added this extra bar also on this easel then. So I use C clamps or other kinds of clamps, whatever might be necessary in order to be able to do what I need to do. If I'm doing a perspective drawing, for example, I might have to rig up a system where I can extend out a long ways, a literal vanishing point. If it was very technical, fortunately, I don't really have to worry about that. But on really large paintings, it can help to kind of have those vanishing points out there and be able to reach them and show show the construction lines that go into making it. But the main thing is that since it's just a piece of wood, it can be whatever you need it to be, whatever you need to make it to be. It's meant to be flexible. It's not meant to restrict you in any way. It's supposed to free you up. You can buy a lot of attachments for an easel, things that are meant to do the things that I'm describing, and others. It's got a little tray on it. You could expand that tray if you wanted to. And here's one of my clamps. If I have a really big painting, sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a clamp on the back, and if I have to hold the the stretcher bars onto the easel. So if I wanted to, I could lean that easel even further forward. In that case, though, there are uh, there are times when you may need to add some um, sand bags even to the back of the easel to hold it in place. You could put them down there, and it keeps it from tilting forward. I haven't had a picture like that for a very long time. In fact, the last time I had a large painting in here was a few years ago. It was 6 by 8 feet, I think. Um, I had one that was 6 by 11 feet, and the easel that I rigged up was actually just some 2 by 4s leaning against the wall. So it's really whatever you need to be able to put the canvas on. And practically speaking, when you put the canvas on the easel, the benefit of the easel is that it allows you to look directly at what you're doing, so you can eliminate the distortion that comes from having something just lay flat. Now this easel here also can lay flat, especially if it was, which is especially nice if you're doing something like watercolor, or you're working with a particularly uh, sloshy kind of medium, runny, something runny, if you don't want it to run down, but you want it to pool. So it's very versatile, and so it's important to take that into consideration as you work, so that you're not limiting yourself. Um, I think that's about it. Oh, there is one other thing, and that is there's these little knobs. I don't know if you can see this one here, for example, that are used to hold the various parts in place. Sometimes those get stripped. The threads on those get stripped, and they might lose their grip. You can buy a replacement knob for these things really inexpensively, maybe at the hardware store, but certainly on Amazon. I got a bag of 5 of them. I can't remember what it was, what the cost was. Maybe it was $7, around $7, something like that. But any part on here can be replaced or repaired or adjusted or fixed. The next thing I want to show you is the paint and palette side of the easel. I have my rigged up box of paints over here, and I think there's one of two kinds of painters. There's those who like to have their paints laid out in a very orderly and strict manner, which is just fine. It suits them. Um, I like to be surprised sometimes by the colors that I'm using. So I don't mind looking around for it, because sometimes I'll pick up something that I hadn't ever thought of as part of a combination or by itself, or who knows what. I've got some old brushes back here in the corner. I've, I've got some flowers on the wall, or not on the wall, but in containers back here with more brushes over there. I keep a hold of my dried out brushes. I'll clean them up and set them aside and save them for when I might be, in need of something that might be used for scumbling, or would be a little less delicate for um, uh, detail work or some other things. I've got a basin which is really over full with brushes, because I don't really clean my brushes very often. I know it's bad, but what I do is I leave them in a walnut oil bath, and that helps to condition the brushes, and it gives me an excuse to put off cleaning them. But there does come a time when I do have to clean them. If you don't replenish the supply of oil, if you let it dry out, it looks like this. And you can see that this is just a dried film of oil, and that's from neglect. Um,
Why that is, I don't know why I did that. Oh yeah, yeah. I think I used linseed oil in that instead of walnut oil. But what the heck, sometimes that happens, right? Um, you're not. I'm not the tidiest kind of a person, but it lends itself to surprise, which is good. And I also have to remember that if I don't clean up, then my wife is going to come in and clean up, and I feel guilty about her having to do that. So I have to be careful to make sure I clean up my mess, right? My brushes in the bath that they're sitting in, I got some really nice detail brushes that are sitting next to those. Those brushes I make sure I clean fairly soon after I use them, at least by the end of the day, because they're delicate. I want to make sure they remain in good condition. I don't want to put them in the bath, and essentially because they might slip forward, and next thing you know, you've got a hook, sort of a hook on the end of the end of the brushes, which isn't all that helpful. There's I have some palette knives. I've got a scraper. This is plate glass here, and the plate glass, just I can scrape dried paint off of it and create little refreshing spots where I can put some more paint. I try to keep them in a relative order when I lay them out on my palette, but when I reduce my palette down to, let's say, two or three colors, then the order is not as important. But if I'm sort of exploring and I'm working with a broad palette, then I want to kind of lay them out in a way that I can predict and think about in a rational way, almost like a rainbow or a color segment of the color wheel, for example. In this little corner over here are my mediums, my various um, glazing mediums, oils that I use to either slow down the drying process or secatives that I would use to speed up the drying process. All of that is in a nice arc around my right hand side since I'm right handed, and it allows me to kind of pick things fairly quickly. Even the stuff that's in this paint pile over here. Above me, I have a light, a fairly bright LED light. It's about 4100 degrees Kelvin in terms of temperature. That makes it a fairly flat white um, on my above my drawing table, and a little further over by my door there, you can see that I've got other lights that are situated. They have various kinds of diffusers on them to kind of take the sort of spread the light out a little bit to make it a little bit with less hot spots. Um, here's the so I try to focus that. I want to focus that light on my easel so I can work. And you can see my setup here where I've got my artist maul situated here. It leans against that top panel there. Um, and this is the painting that we've been working on. I took a little break from to do this other landscape that you may have noticed on my list. In this painting, you can see. Excuse me. There we go. In this painting, you can see the the whole process of painting in one image. Oh, look, I have a fly swatter. We'll use this. You can see the bare canvas.
you can see a uh, thin paint that is thin, and I just let it run as I just blocked in these figures. Some I'll say many artists will tone the entire canvas, and the basic reason for doing that is to give themselves something else to compare one color to a background. Let's say that's a middle background color, more of a you know middle value or middle range arrangements. A lot of times that's composed of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. You can mix them together. You get a very nice gray. You can adjust it one way or another. That's what this is here. This is a combination of burnt umber, or burnt sienna, or ultramarine blue. I didn't, in this case here, I haven't toned the whole canvas. I'll do it either way. It depends on what's going on. But the thing I wanted to show you was that it's not necessary to take the whole painting and bring it up layer by layer. In other words, you start with the thinner layer first, the thinner, drier layer. So this is paint thinned with mineral spirits. And then you can take it up to, let's say, another layer, which is paint with a little less mineral spirits or just plain paint. And then you go up to another level when you might add some linseed oil to it and some glazing medium. And basically you're just watching as you go what layers you're working on to determine what kind of fat over lean mixture that you need. The reason that we're always talking about fat over lean is if you start out with something that has a lot of fat in it, what's going to end up happening is that the upper layers are going to crack over it, just like mud at the bottom of a river when it dries out. The mud on the bottom still stays wet by the mud that is reached by the sun. It dries and it shrinks and it cracks. We want to avoid that at all costs. So we want our paintings to last forever, and the best way to do that is to think about this idea of fat over lean and sticking to it. But you don't need to do the whole painting that way. For me, it's important to allow for possibilities and to kind of see what happens. And so that's the whole thing that I'm dealing with as I'm working.